Welcome, my friend. Tonight, I will tell you a story about true courage. It is the tale of a girl who did not carry a sharp sword, but instead carried a light that changed history forever. Long ago, there was a beautiful kingdom called Eldoria, but it was a deeply broken place. For 20 long years, a dark and terrible war had shadowed the land. The enemy was strong, and the king's army was failing. If you looked up into the sky, you would not see bright white clouds. You would see dark smoke on the horizon from burning cities. The people of Eldoria were exhausted. They were hungry, and they had lost all their hope. But far away from the fighting, hidden deep inside a quiet green valley, lived a 16-year-old girl named Elara. She was just a poor shepherd. Every day, she sat in the tall grass watching her quiet flock of sheep eat in the warm sun. Elara had no money. She had no shining armor. She could not even read or write a single word. She lived a very simple, peaceful life, completely separated from the cruelty of the war. But on the evening of her 16th birthday, the peace of the valley changed. As the sun went down, the trees began to move, and she heard the soft whisper of the wind. It was not a normal wind. There was a strange, heavy feeling in the cold air, a feeling that something ancient and powerful was waking up. She stood alone in the empty field, just a simple girl, completely unaware that in a few short months the entire kingdom would fall to its knees before her. Elara lived a beautifully simple life. She was known throughout her small village not for her beauty or her wealth, but for her extreme, unwavering kindness. If a tired, hungry traveler passed through their quiet valley, Elara would immediately give them her own warm bread. If a neighbor's child was sick, she would sit by their bed and sing softly for hours. Her heart was completely pure, completely untouched by the violence of the outside world, but that violence was moving closer to her home every single day. In the evenings, when she looked over the green hills, the sky did not turn a peaceful purple or dark blue. Instead, Elara could see the angry orange glow of fire destroying the distant villages. The bitter smell of ash and smoke traveled on the wind, covering her valley like a heavy, dark blanket. The villagers began to whisper in terrible fear. They knew the king's army was losing the war. They knew that Prince Kalin, the true heir to the throne, was hiding far away in a stone castle, too afraid to fight. The kingdom was dying. One cool evening, Elara walked deep into the dark, quiet forest near her home. She wanted to pray for peace, away from the fearful whispers of her neighbors. The forest was her safe place, but as she knelt under a large old oak tree, something impossible happened. The normal dark shadows of the evening suddenly vanished. A brilliant, blinding light broke through the heavy branches above her. It was not the light of the sun, and it was not the warm light of a campfire. It was a pure, glowing, white light that surrounded her completely. Elara fell forward, dropping to her knees in the cold, wet grass. Her whole body was trembling. Then a deep, crystal-clear voice echoed, not in the quiet forest, but directly inside her own mind. The voice was gentle, but it carried the heavy, powerful weight of a massive storm. "Elara," the voice commanded, ringing perfectly clear in her mind, "leave the sheep, leave the quiet valley. You must lead the prince to his throne, or the kingdom of Eldoria will burn to ash." Elara stopped breathing. Her chest felt completely tight, and her heart hammered violently against her ribs. She was completely terrified. How could she save a massive kingdom? She was just a poor farm child. She had never held a heavy sword. She knew absolutely nothing of war, of angry soldiers, or of cowardly kings. She squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her hands tightly over her ears. She wanted to close her eyes and pretend it was just a strange, frightening dream. But the light did not fade, and the voice did not disappear. It only grew louder. For 3 long days, Elara walked away from her peaceful valley. Her feet were covered in blisters, and she was completely exhausted. But the memory of the brilliant white light pushed her forward. Finally, she reached the royal castle of Eldoria. It was a massive fortress with high stone walls and heavy iron gates, built to protect the cowardly Prince Kalin from the war. Elara walked straight up to the entrance. She stood before the royal guards, who were tall, strong men dressed in shining armor. She looked up at them, her brown eyes steady and serious. "I must see Prince Calin," she said clearly. "I have a message that will save the kingdom." The guards stared at her for a moment. Then they burst into loud, arrogant laughter. The mocking laughter of men in armor echoed against the stone walls. They looked at her dirty dress, her messy hair, and her empty hands. To them, she was just a foolish, crazy farm child. "Go back to your sheep, little girl," one guard shouted angrily. He reached out and pushed her hard. Alara lost her balance and fell backward, landing heavily in the cold, wet mud. Most people would have given up right there. Most people would have cried from the deep humiliation, turned around, and run back to the safety of their home. But Alara made a different choice. She did not cry. She did not shout back at the angry men. She wiped the dark mud from her face, stood up slowly, and walked right back to the heavy iron gates. Then, she sat down on the hard stone ground. She sat. She waited. She did not move. Later that afternoon, the sky turned dark gray, and a cold, freezing rain began to fall. The heavy rain washed over her face and soaked her thin clothes. The guards went inside to stand by the warm fire, expecting the stupid girl to leave. But the next morning, when they looked outside, Alara was still there. She had not eaten. She had not slept. She was sitting in the exact same spot, staring directly at the iron gates with a quiet, stubborn determination. Another day passed, and the rain continued to pour. Still, she sat. She waited. She did not move. Slowly, the loud mockery of the guards began to disappear. Their cruel laughter was replaced by a strange, nervous silence. They looked at her unblinking eyes and felt a deep, uncomfortable fear. She was just a girl in the mud, but her absolute silent stillness was somehow heavier and stronger than their metal armor. The guards thought the cold, freezing rain would finally break her spirit. They did not know she was made of fire. After 3 days in the freezing rain, the heavy iron gates finally groaned open. The guards, unable to understand her unbreakable spirit, brought Alara inside. They led her through long, dark stone hallways until they reached the great hall of the castle. It was a massive room full of whispering nobles dressed in rich silk and bright gold. At the far end of the hall sat the royal throne. A man wearing a heavy gold crown and a beautiful red cape sat upon it. But this was a trick. The cowardly Prince Calin did not believe Alara. He wanted to test her. He had ordered a servant to sit on the throne and pretend to be the ruler. The real Prince Calin was hiding in a dark corner of the room, dressed in the dirty brown clothes of a simple servant. Alara walked into the grand room. Her clothes were still covered in wet mud, but her head was held high. She did not look at the gold or the rich silk. She stopped in the center of the hall. The room fell completely silent. Everyone stared at her, waiting to see her make a foolish mistake. But Alara did not bow to the fake prince on the throne. Instead, her quiet brown eyes moved slowly across the room. She looked past the whispering nobles. She looked into the shadows. Then, without any hesitation, she walked straight to the dark corner. She stopped in front of the young man in the dirty brown clothes and bowed deeply. "My Prince Calin," she said, her voice ringing clear in the silent room. "I am here to give you back your kingdom." The room gasped in shock. Prince Calin turned completely pale. He was terrified, but he was also deeply amazed. He recognized the pure truth in her eyes. In that breathtaking moment, the tricky, deceptive atmosphere of the court was completely shattered by her simple honesty. Trembling, the prince agreed to give her an army. He offered her his finest, sharpest steel sword. But Alara gently pushed the heavy weapon away. "I do not need to kill," she said. "I only need to lead." Instead of a sword, she asked only for a shining silver banner. She cut off her long, messy hair so it would not blow in her eyes. She put on simple, heavy white armor. When she rode out of the castle gates, the heavy sound of horse hooves echoed loudly on the stone. She could not go back to being a quiet shepherd now. She had crossed the point of no return. She was leading 5,000 hardened men into the darkest battle of the century, armed with nothing but a piece of cloth. The journey to the besieged city of Iron Gate was absolutely miserable. The sky was a heavy, dark gray, and the cold rain returned, turning the roads into deep, thick mud. 5,000 heavy boots stuck in the wet earth with every step. The veteran soldiers of Eldoria were furious. They were proud, angry men covered in old scars, and they felt deeply insulted. They could not believe they were following a 16-year-old shepherd girl into the most dangerous battle of the war. As they marched, angry whispers moved through the ranks in the dark. "She is just a foolish child," they muttered, their faces tight with cold and frustration. "She will get us all killed. What good is a shining silver banner against 1,000 enemy swords?" When night fell, the army stopped to camp. The crackle of the campfires was the only warm sound in the freezing, wet darkness. The soldiers sat close to the flames, complaining loudly about the terrible weather and their certain death. They waited for Elara to cry, to complain, or to hide in a warm tent like the cowardly Prince Kalen always did. But Elara did not hide, and she did not argue with their angry whispers. Instead, she walked quietly through the cold, muddy camp. While the men rested, she carried heavy buckets of water to tend to the sick and tired horses. She offered her own dry blankets to the youngest, shivering soldiers. She moved with a gentle, unmovable energy. When her work was done, she knelt quietly by the fire, closed her eyes, and prayed. She did not look afraid. She looked completely peaceful. Slowly, the aggressive, fearful energy of the men began to change. They watched her in the flickering light of the flames. They saw her white armor covered in mud, but her spirit was perfectly clean. The loud, angry complaints faded away. The mocking laughter turned into a quiet, nervous respect. One by one, the hardened soldiers stopped talking and simply watched the young girl who carried no sword. By the time the sun began to rise on the final day, the army was completely silent. The men stood taller. They gripped their heavy weapons tighter. They had learned to respect her around the warm campfire. But tomorrow, as they finally saw the dark, towering walls of Iron Gate, they would see if she could survive the arrows. The morning sun was hidden behind thick, dark clouds as the Eldorian army finally reached the city of Iron Gate. The battlefield was a terrifying sight. The enemy army was massive, waiting for them with thousands of sharp swords and heavy shields. Suddenly, the chaotic battle began. The air filled with the sharp whistle of arrows. The sky turned completely black as a deadly rain of iron fell upon them. Soldiers shouted in fear. The Eldorian men hesitated, terrified by the overwhelming size of the enemy. But at the very front of the army, riding a white horse, was Elara. She held the shining silver banner high above her head, riding straight into the terrifying storm of war. She did not carry a weapon, but her light guided the men forward. Then, disaster struck. A stray arrow flew through the thick smoke. It hit Elara deep in her right shoulder. She gasped, her hands opened. The silver banner dropped. She fell heavily from her horse, crashing down into the cold, wet mud. Bright red blood stained her pure white armor. Instantly, the Eldorian army froze in horror. Their brave leader was down. The sudden, crushing despair was too heavy to carry. Panic spread like wildfire. The veteran soldiers dropped their weapons. They began to step back. They began to retreat, losing all their hope in a single second. Elara lay in the mud. The pain in her shoulder was blinding. Her vision was dark. It was so easy to just close her eyes and rest. But then, she heard the clear, deep voice in her mind again. She saw the bright light from the forest. "If I stay down, the light dies today," she thought to herself. "I must stand." With a loud, painful cry, Elara grabbed the broken arrow. She pulled it out of her shoulder and threw it into the mud. Her body was shaking, but her spirit was explosive and unstoppable. Slowly, she pushed herself up from the ground. She reached down with her bleeding arm, grabbed the heavy wooden pole, and raised the silver banner even higher than before. She stood alone in the smoke, shining like a star in the dark night. When the retreating soldiers saw her stand up, something inside them broke. Their fear vanished completely. A deafening roar of victory exploded from 5,000 men. With new, unstoppable courage, they raised their swords and charged into the enemy. Before the sun went down, the enemy was completely defeated. The city of Iron Gate was saved. Alara had won the impossible battle. She had given the prince his kingdom back. But she forgot that cowardly kings do not like to share their glory. Soon after the great victory at Iron Gate, Prince Cailan was finally crowned King of Eldoria. He wore a heavy gold crown and sat upon a safe, comfortable throne. But as time passed, a dark, bitter feeling began to grow in his weak heart. When he rode through the city streets, the people did not cheer for their new king. Instead, they shouted the name of the brave shepherd girl. They threw beautiful flowers for Alara. Deep jealousy and fear poisoned the king's mind. He realized that as long as Alara lived, the people would never truly respect him. A few months later, during a small battle near the edge of the kingdom, the king saw his chance. Alara and a small group of soldiers were fighting outside the walls of a border city. Suddenly, a massive enemy force arrived and completely surrounded them. Alara held her silver banner high and called for the king's reinforcements to open the city gates and help her retreat. But King Cailan stood safely on top of the high stone wall. He looked down at the girl who had given him his crown. With a cold, jealous heart, he gave a terrible order. He did not send his army. Instead, the sound of the heavy wooden gates shutting echoed loudly across the battlefield. He intentionally locked her outside. It was the ultimate betrayal. Alara was captured by the enemy. They dragged her far away and locked her inside a cold, dark stone tower. The enemy generals heeded her light. They demanded that she confess she was a liar. They wanted her to say the pure voice in the forest was fake and her courage was just a trick. But Alara never broke. Even in the freezing dark of the tower, her spirit remained completely pure. She refused to lie. After that, the brave girl with the silver banner was never seen again. King Cailan smiled, believing he had finally erased her from history. But the cowardly king was completely wrong. When the people of Eldoria learned of his terrible betrayal, they abandoned him. They refused to wear the king's royal crest. Instead, when you looked up at the sky, you could see thousands of silver banners flying in the wind from every window and every rooftop. The cowardly king's name was quickly forgotten in the dust of history. But Alara's pure courage became a powerful legacy. They destroyed her body, but they could not destroy her light. She did not need a gold crown or a sharp sword, because her unbreakable spirit had made her immortal. Now, let us look back at the story of the brave girl from above. Take a deep breath, relax, and listen to her journey one more time, simply and slowly. In the kingdom of Eldoria, there lived a poor shepherd girl named Alara. She lived a very quiet and simple life. She spent her days watching her sheep in the green fields. She was a very kind girl, but she had no money, no armor, and no power. At that time, her kingdom was losing a terrible war. The cities were burning, and the people were very afraid. One evening, a bright, glowing light came to Alara in the forest. A clear voice spoke to her. The voice told her that she must leave her home and save the kingdom. She was only a young girl, and she was afraid, but she listened to the voice. Alara walked for many days to reach the great stone castle. She wanted to help the cowardly Prince Cailan. At first, the royal guards laughed at her. They pushed her into the mud. But she did not leave. She sat in the cold rain and waited. Finally, the cowardly prince saw her unbreakable spirit. He gave her an army. But Alara did not want a sharp sword to fight. She only wanted a shining silver banner to guide the men. Alara led the soldiers into the biggest battle of the war. During the terrible fight, she was hit by a sharp arrow. She fell down heavily into the mud. The soldiers were terrified, and they wanted to run away. But Alara did not stay down. She showed great courage. She pulled the arrow out of her shoulder and stood back up. She raised her silver banner high in the air. When the soldiers saw her incredible courage, they fought hard and won the war. After the victory, the cowardly Prince Kalen became the king. But he was not a good or brave man. He saw that the people cheered for Alara. They loved the brave girl, but they did not love him. The king became very jealous and angry. A few months later, the cowardly king betrayed Alara. During a small fight, Alara was surrounded by the enemy. She asked the king for help, but the jealous king locked the heavy city gates. He left her outside. It was a terrible betrayal. The enemy captured Alara and locked her in a dark tower. She was never seen again. The king thought he had won. He thought the people would forget her. But he was completely wrong. When the people learned how he betrayed her, they stopped following him. They quickly forgot the cowardly king. Instead, they remembered the brave shepherd girl. They flew her silver banner from every house. Because of her pure heart, Alara's silver banner became a symbol of true courage forever. My name is Commander Thorn. I wore my heavy armor for 20 long years, fighting in the darkest wars for the kingdom of Eldoria. I thought I knew everything about war. I thought I knew exactly what true strength looked like. But I was completely wrong. I still remember the day she arrived at our military camp. When the generals told me that a 16-year-old shepherd girl was leading our army, I laughed right in her face. I looked at her small, empty hands and her simple white armor. I called her a foolish child. I thought the cowardly prince had gone completely mad. How could a little girl with a piece of cloth save us from a massive, terrifying enemy? But then the long march began. The cold rain poured down for days. The mud on my boots was so thick and heavy that every single step felt like a battle. My oldest veteran soldiers complained endlessly in the dark. But I watched Alara. I saw her walking in the freezing rain, and she never complained once. At night, while we rested by the warm fire, I saw her carrying heavy buckets of water for the sick horses. I saw her give her own dry blanket to a shivering young soldier. I thought she would cry and run away. Instead, I saw a quiet, unmovable peace. Then came the terrible Battle of Iron Gate. I was standing right behind her when the fighting started. I saw the sky turn completely black with iron arrows, and then I saw her fall. I saw the arrow strike her and I watched her crash heavily into the wet mud. In that terrible second, my heart stopped. I thought it was over. I thought the light of our kingdom was finally dead. We all started to step back in total fear, but then I saw the most incredible thing of my entire life. I saw her bleeding shoulder. I heard her cry of pain, and I watched her pull that sharp iron arrow straight out of her own body. She stood back up, covered in red blood and dark mud, and raised that shining silver banner high into the smoky sky. When I looked at her shining in the smoke, I didn't see a foolish child anymore. I saw a spirit that could not be broken. I spent my whole life serving a cowardly king who hid in a castle. But in that moment, I knew the absolute truth. I would have followed Alara to the very end of the world. And so the legend of Alara and the silver banner comes to a quiet close. When we look at our own lives, it is very easy to feel small. The world often tells us that in order to make a real difference, we need to have a great advantage. We are taught that we need a lot of money, a high position, a fancy title, or a sharp sword to fight our daily battles. We spend so much of our time waiting. We wait for someone else to give us permission to do what is right. We wait until we feel perfectly ready, or until the people around us believe in our dreams. But Alara's story teaches us something completely different. She was just a 16-year-old shepherd girl who could not even read. She faced arrogant guards, freezing rain, and a terrifying army. She even faced the bitter jealousy of a cowardly king who betrayed her. When she was knocked down into the dark, wet mud, she did not wait for someone else to save her. She found the strength to pull the arrow out and stand back up on her own. She proved that you do not need a weapon to lead, and you do not need a title to be a true hero. Always remember this simple, beautiful truth. True power does not come from the crown you wear, but from the unbreakable fire you carry in your heart. You do not need to wait for the world's permission to be brave. If this story inspired you today, please like the video and subscribe for more meaningful English stories. Tell me in the comments below, have you ever had to be brave when everyone else doubted you? I would love to read your experiences. You can also listen to this story again to practice your speaking and listening skills. Have a wonderful day, my friend, and never hide your light.